A memo was sent to the top 5 retailers in the United States in the fall of 2023. It was not about price hikes. It was not about inflation adjustments. It was not about shifting consumer demand. The subject line on that memo read, "Permanent inventory removal." Not temporary, not seasonal, permanent. Raccoon Survival has spent the last 11 months tracking down what that memo contained, who wrote it, and which items it targeted. What follows is the result of that search. 10 items, 10 categories of things that used to sit on shelves in every store in this country. Things your parents bought without thinking, things your grandparents considered as basic as running water. They are being removed, not because nobody wants them, not because they stopped selling, because someone decided you do not need them anymore. Before we get to the memo itself, we need to understand what it looks like when an item disappears from a supply chain. Not what it feels like. What it actually, mechanically looks like. Because it does not happen the way you think. There is no announcement. There is no recall notice. There is no empty shelf with a sign that says, "Sorry, this product has been discontinued." The process is quieter than that. Slower, more deliberate. And by the time you notice, the item has usually been gone for 2 or 3 years. You just stopped reaching for it. Gerald Hutchins owned a pharmacy in Brenton, West Virginia, for 42 years. His father opened it in 1959. Gerald took it over in 1981. For 4 decades, that pharmacy was the only one within 53 miles. Gerald knew every customer by name. He knew their prescriptions, their allergies, their family histories. He filled prescriptions for 3 generations of the same families. He was not a chain. He was not a franchise. He was a pharmacist who believed that a town without a pharmacy is a town that has been abandoned. In March of 2024, Gerald Hutchins closed his doors. He did not go bankrupt. He did not retire. His son offered to take over the business. Gerald said one word: impossible. When Raccoon Survival reached him by phone, he explained what he meant. He said the word impossible was not about money. It was not about regulation. It was about inventory. He said there were 14 essential medications that he had stocked continuously since 1981. Medications for blood pressure, infection, pain management, diabetes, basic antibiotics. 14 medications that his community depended on. By 2023, he could reliably source only 6 of them. The other 8 had become what the industry calls allocation limited. That means the manufacturer still technically makes them, but the supply is routed to hospital systems and large pharmacy chains first. Small independents get whatever is left, and increasingly, what was left was nothing. Gerald Hutchins is not an isolated case. Between 2018 and 2024, the United States lost an average of 3 independent pharmacies per county. That is not a national figure. That is per county. In rural counties, the number is higher. In some states, entire regions now exist in what the healthcare industry quietly calls pharmacy deserts. Places where the nearest pharmacist is an hour drive away. Sometimes 2, sometimes more. These are not places where people forgot to build pharmacies. These are places where pharmacies existed for decades and then disappeared. The question is why? The obvious answer is economics. Small pharmacies cannot compete with chains. Insurance reimbursements favor volume. Operating costs rise. Revenue falls. The market corrects itself. That is the story you are supposed to believe, and it is not entirely wrong. But it is not entirely right either. Because the pharmacies are not just losing customers, they are losing inventory. You cannot run a pharmacy if you cannot stock the medications your patients need, and you cannot stock the medications if the supply chain has decided your patients are not a priority. The first item on our list is the one Gerald Hutchins described as the canary in the coal mine. Amoxicillin 500 milligrams, manufactured domestically. Amoxicillin is one of the most commonly prescribed antibiotics on Earth. It has been in use since 1972. It treats ear infections, sinus infections, strep throat, urinary tract infections, skin infections, dental infections. It is on the World Health Organization list of essential medicines. A course of treatment costs less than $10. In 1990, approximately 40% of the amoxicillin consumed in the United States was manufactured domestically. As of 2024, that figure is below 4%. The manufacturing did not stop because the drug stopped working. It did not stop because demand fell. Demand is higher than ever. The manufacturing moved offshore because the profit margin on generic amoxicillin in a domestic factory is effectively zero. It costs more to make it here than the market will pay for it. So the factories closed, one by one, quietly, without press conferences, without congressional hearings, without anyone telling Gerald Hutchins or the 7,000 people who depended on his pharmacy that the antibiotic they had taken for granted their entire lives was now manufactured almost exclusively in India and China. When the supply chain works, this is invisible. The pills arrive, the bottles are filled, the patients go home. But when the supply chain hiccups, when a factory in Hyderabad has a quality control failure, when a port in Shanghai closes for 2 weeks, when a trade dispute adds a tariff, the pills do not arrive, and there is no domestic backup. There is no factory in Ohio that can spin up production in 6 weeks. That factory closed in 2009. The equipment was sold. The building was repurposed. The workers found other jobs. The institutional knowledge of how to manufacture amoxicillin at scale in the United States is, for practical purposes, gone. Raccoon Survival confirmed this with a supply chain analyst named Douglas Weaver. Douglas spent 21 years working in pharmaceutical distribution before leaving the industry in 2022. He confirmed that amoxicillin is not the only essential medication with functionally zero domestic manufacturing capacity. He listed 11 others: metformin, lisinopril, amlodipine, hydrochlorothiazide, names that mean nothing to most people and everything to the 60 million Americans who take them daily. Douglas said something that stayed with Raccoon Survival. He said the system was not designed to fail. It was designed to be efficient. Efficiency and resilience are opposites. An efficient system has no redundancy. A resilient system has nothing but redundancy. America chose efficiency 40 years ago. Nobody told the patients. Gerald Hutchins was the first clue. Douglas Weaver was the second. The third came from a hardware store. 1,100 miles from Brenton, West Virginia, in a town called Dalhart, Texas, a man named Roy Caldwell has operated Caldwell Hardware since 1977. Roy is 71 years old. He has no plans to retire. He has no plans to close. But in the fall of 2023, he noticed something that he described as strange. His distributor, a regional wholesale company that had supplied his store for over 30 years, informed him that several product lines would no longer be available for reorder. The products were not exotic. They were not specialty items. They were hand tools, a manual hand drill, a non-electric crank-operated screwdriver set, a set of hand-forged steel wrenches with no plastic components. These tools had been on Roy Caldwell's shelves since the store opened. They were not bestsellers. They were not high margin, but they sold, steadily, reliably, to ranchers and farmers and mechanics who needed tools that worked without batteries, without chargers, without firmware updates, without a wireless connection to a manufacturer's server. Roy asked his distributor why the tools were being discontinued. The distributor told him the manufacturer had ceased production. Roy called the manufacturer directly. He spoke with a sales representative who told him the hand tool line had been sunsetted. Roy asked what sunsetted meant. The representative said it meant the company had shifted production capacity to its powered tool line, which offered better margins and recurring revenue through battery replacement and accessory sales. Roy asked if there was another manufacturer he could source from. The representative gave him two names. Roy called both. One had ceased production 18 months earlier. The other had been acquired by the same parent company and was in the process of sunsetting its own hand tool line. Raccoon Survival visited Roy Caldwell's store in January of 2024. The hand tool aisle had not been replaced. It had been filled with powered equivalents. Every item on the shelf now required a battery. Some required a proprietary battery, available only from the manufacturer. Some required a wireless connection to register the tool before first use. A hand drill that Roy used to sell for $19 had been replaced by a cordless drill that cost $89 and required a $40 battery pack that lasted approximately 18 months before losing charge capacity. The math is not complicated. A $19 hand drill works until the user physically breaks it, a lifetime in most cases. An $89 cordless drill generates recurring revenue every 18 months, indefinitely. For the manufacturer, the question is not which tool is better. The question is, which tool produces a longer revenue stream? The answer eliminated the hand drill from the supply chain. This is the second item, not a specific tool, but a category. Analog hand tools. Manual devices that require no electricity, no battery, no software, no registration, no subscription, no login, no connection to anything other than the hand of the person using them. These tools are not being improved. They are not being replaced by something better. They are being replaced by something more profitable. And the old versions are not available from anyone because the companies that used to make them have been acquired, consolidated, or bankrupted by competitors who only manufacture the powered versions. Roy Caldwell told Raccoon Survival something that echoed what Gerald Hutchins said. He said his customers do not want the new tools, they want the old ones. But the old ones no longer exist in the supply chain. He said, it is not a shortage. A shortage implies the item will come back. This is an erasure. The item is not coming back because the infrastructure to manufacture it has been deliberately dismantled. The third clue came from a woman named Patricia Coleman. Patricia operates a seed library in Ashland, Oregon. A seed library is exactly what it sounds like. People deposit seeds. Other people check them out, grow them, save seeds from the harvest, and return them. The library has been operating since 2008. At its peak, it held over 1,100 varieties of vegetable, herb, and grain seeds, heirloom varieties, open-pollinated, seeds that had been saved and passed down by families for generations, seeds that were adapted to specific climates, specific soils, specific altitudes, seeds that were, in the most literal sense, irreplaceable. In 2021, Patricia noticed something alarming. Her primary seed suppliers, the small companies that specialized in heirloom and open-pollinated varieties, began disappearing. Not failing, disappearing. One was acquired by a subsidiary of a multinational agricultural corporation. Another had its distribution agreement terminated by its primary wholesaler. A third simply stopped returning calls. Patricia began tracking the consolidation. Over the following 3 years, she documented that 40% of the varieties her library had stocked in 2018 were no longer commercially available from any US-based supplier. 40%. Not because the seeds stopped growing, not because farmers stopped wanting them, because the companies that sold them had been purchased by corporations that had no interest in selling open-pollinated seeds. Open-pollinated seeds can be saved and replanted. That is their entire point. That is also their commercial weakness. A farmer who saves seeds does not need to buy seeds next year. A corporation that sells seeds needs farmers to buy seeds every year. The solution is elegantly simple. Replace open-pollinated varieties with hybrid or patented varieties that cannot be legally saved and replanted. Then acquire or eliminate the companies that still sell the old varieties. The farmer has no choice. The gardener has no choice. The seed library has no choice. The varieties that sustained human agriculture for 10,000 years are removed from the commercial supply chain, and the replacements come with a licensing agreement. Patricia Coleman gave Raccoon Survival a list. It contained 147 seed varieties that were commercially available in the United States in 2018 and are not commercially available today. Not from any domestic supplier. Not at any price. 147 varieties of food. Gone. Not extinct, technically. Somewhere, someone has these seeds in a vault, in a freezer, in a jar on a shelf. But commercially, functionally, for any ordinary person who walks into a garden center or searches online, they do not exist. Gerald Hutchins lost medications. Roy Caldwell lost tools. Patricia Coleman lost seeds. 3 different industries, 3 different people, 3 different states, the same pattern. Items that had been available for decades, that served essential functions, that were relied upon by ordinary people, quietly removed from the supply chain without announcement, without replacement, and without recourse. The question was whether this pattern extended further. Raccoon Survival spent the next 7 months finding out. The answer is yes. It extends much further. The 4th item category is canned goods. Not canned goods as a concept, canned goods as a supply chain reality. In 2020, there were approximately 420 regional canning operations in the United States. Small and mid-sized companies that produced canned vegetables, fruits, soups and meats under local and regional brand names. By 2024, that number had dropped to approximately 250. A 40% reduction in 4 years. The companies did not all go bankrupt. Many were acquired. Their production lines were consolidated into larger facilities, and the regional brands were discontinued. A town that had its own canning operation, producing food from local farms, packed in local facilities, sold in local stores, now receives identical cans from a centralized production facility 500 or 1,000 miles away. The food inside is often the same. Sometimes it is not. But the supply chain is now longer, more fragile, and controlled by fewer decision-makers. Raccoon Survival spoke with a food distribution specialist named Linda Okafor. Linda worked for a regional grocery cooperative in the upper Midwest for 16 years. She confirmed the consolidation and added a detail that most consumers would never notice. She said the private label products, the store brand cans that most shoppers buy because they are cheaper, are increasingly manufactured by a single contractor for multiple competing grocery chains. The labels are different. The logos are different. The food inside is identical. It comes from the same factory, packed on the same line, with different labels applied at the end. This means that if that one factory has a contamination issue, a labor dispute, a supply interruption, or a quality control failure, the private label products of a dozen different grocery chains are simultaneously affected. Linda called this concentration risk. She said it is the most predictable crisis in the American food system, and it has not happened yet at scale, and when it does, no one in a position of authority will be able to claim they were not warned. The 5th item is incandescent light bulbs. Not the energy-efficient argument. That debate has been had. The issue is narrower and more specific. Incandescent bulbs require no electronic components. They contain no circuit boards, no firmware, no wireless transmitters. They do not connect to an app. They cannot be remotely monitored. They cannot be remotely disabled. They cannot report data on your usage patterns. They are, in the simplest possible terms, a wire inside a glass envelope that glows when electricity passes through it. The technology has not changed since Thomas Edison. That is precisely why it is being eliminated. The replacement LED smart bulbs are in many ways superior. They last longer, they use less energy, they produce less heat, they can be dimmed, colored, scheduled, and automated. They can also be connected to a home network. They can transmit data. They can be updated remotely. They can, in certain documented cases, be disabled remotely by the manufacturer. An incandescent bulb cannot do any of those things. It also cannot be controlled by anyone other than the person who screwed it into the socket. The legislation that phased out incandescent bulbs was framed as an environmental measure. The environmental argument has merit, but the practical effect is the elimination of the last common household technology that operates with zero digital dependency. Every light source in a modern home is now, or will soon be, a networked device. Whether that matters to you depends on how you feel about networked devices. But the choice has been removed. That is the point. The sixth item is non-digital thermometers. Mercury thermometers were phased out for legitimate safety reasons. Mercury is toxic, no argument there. But the replacements were not limited to safe analog alternatives. Glass thermometers with alcohol-based liquids work identically to mercury thermometers without the toxicity. They require no batteries. They require no calibration software. They last indefinitely. They cost less than $3 to manufacture. They are being systematically replaced in retail by digital thermometers that cost between $8 and $25, require batteries, lose calibration over time, and must be replaced every 3 to 5 years. Raccoon Survival checked the inventory of 14 major retail pharmacy chains in February of 2024. 11 of them carried 0 non-digital thermometers. 0. Not out of stock, not in the back, not available for order, not listed in their system. The product category had been removed. The seventh item is mechanical watches and clocks. Not luxury timepieces, basic, functional, wind-up or spring-driven clocks and watches that tell time without a battery, without a connection, without a satellite signal. Department stores that carried mechanical alarm clocks a decade ago now carry none. The shelf space has been allocated to smart clocks, digital displays, and phone charging stations with time readouts. A device that tells time using nothing but a spring and a set of gears has become, in the American retail landscape, functionally unavailable outside of specialty stores and online marketplaces. The device that replaced it stops working when the power goes out. The eighth item is basic, unconnected kitchen appliances. A manual can opener has not changed in 70 years because it does not need to change. It is a lever, a cutting wheel, and a handle. It will outlast every electric can opener ever manufactured. It requires no power, no maintenance, no replacement parts. And it is being pushed to the bottom shelf, to the back of the store, to the clearance bin, because it generates exactly 1 sale per customer per lifetime. The electric version generates replacement sales, accessory sales, and eventual repurchase when the motor fails. The pattern is identical across the kitchen category. Manual coffee grinders replaced by electric. Hand crank grain mills replaced by powered units. Mortar and pestle sets reduced to a single token option, if they are stocked at all. Each replacement is individually defensible. Each replacement is, in isolation, an improvement in convenience. In aggregate, they represent the systematic elimination of every kitchen tool that functions without external power. The ninth item is repair parts for common household appliances. This is not about the right to repair, although the right to repair is relevant. This is about availability. 20 years ago, if a washing machine belt snapped, a homeowner could walk into a hardware store and buy a replacement belt for under $10. The repair took 15 minutes. The machine lasted another decade. Today, replacement parts for major appliances are increasingly available only through authorized service channels. The parts themselves have not become more complex. A rubber belt is a rubber belt, but the distribution has been restructured so that the consumer cannot easily purchase the part independently. The authorized repair costs between $150 and $300. The part itself costs $8. The labor takes 20 minutes. The pricing is designed to make repair economically irrational compared to replacement. A washing machine that could have lasted 20 years with a $10 belt is instead replaced after 7 years with a new unit that generates another 7 years of revenue for the manufacturer. The old model is not supported. The parts are not stocked. The repair manual is not published. The machine is designed to be disposable, and the supply chain is structured to enforce that design. The 10th and final item is printed reference material. Encyclopedias obviously are gone, but the category extends further. Printed repair manuals for vehicles, printed field guides for plant identification, printed first aid references, printed maps. These are not nostalgic artifacts. They are information storage devices that require no power, no connection, no subscription, no login, and no permission from a server to access. Every digital replacement is, in some measurable way, more convenient, more searchable, more up-to-date. Every digital replacement is also dependent on infrastructure that the user does not control. A printed repair manual works when the power is out. A digital repair manual works when the company that hosts it decides it should work. Bookstores that stocked reference sections a decade ago now devote that space to other categories. Libraries are digitizing their reference collections, in some cases discarding the physical copies. The information is not lost. It is transferred to a medium that requires perpetual access to external systems. The knowledge is the same. The dependency is new. Those are the 10 categories: medications, hand tools, seeds, canned goods, incandescent bulbs, non-digital thermometers, mechanical timekeeping, manual kitchen tools, repair parts, printed reference material. 10 categories that share one characteristic. Every item in every category functions without dependence on an external system. No battery, no network, no subscription, no login, no firmware update, no cloud server, no corporate database, no permission. They work because they are designed to work by themselves, in the hands of the person who owns them, without ongoing input from anyone else. Now, the obvious explanation. Raccoon Survival has been doing this long enough to know that the obvious explanation must be addressed before the real one. The obvious explanation is the market. These items disappeared because consumers chose something else. Consumers wanted convenience. Consumers wanted digital. Consumers wanted connected. The market responded. Inefficient products were replaced by efficient ones. This is capitalism working exactly as it should. Supply follows demand. Old products die. New products replace them. Nobody is erasing anything. The market is simply evolving. This explanation is comfortable. It is familiar. It is partially true, and it does not survive contact with the actual data. Here is why. Market evolution implies consumer choice. Choice implies alternatives. If analog tools were replaced because consumers preferred powered tools, both options would exist on the shelf, and the consumer would choose. That is how markets work. That is not what is happening. The analog options are not losing a market competition. They are being removed from the market entirely. You cannot choose a hand drill if no manufacturer makes one. You cannot choose an heirloom seed variety if no supplier sells it. You cannot choose to repair your washing machine if no distributor stocks the part. The choice has been pre-made. The consumer arrives at the shelf and sees only the option that generates recurring revenue. The other option is not on the shelf. It is not in the back. It is not in the system. It does not exist within the commercial supply chain. This is not a market evolving. This is a market being curated. The distinction matters. Market evolution is organic, decentralized, driven by millions of individual decisions. Market curation is strategic, centralized, driven by a small number of corporate decisions about what consumers are allowed to buy. One is the free market. The other is the opposite of the free market, wearing the free market's clothes. Raccoon Survival obtained a document in August of 2024. The document was provided by a source who works in supply chain management for one of the 5 largest retail corporations in the United States. The source requested anonymity. The document is 14 pages. It is not classified. It is not illegal to possess. It is an internal strategy memo, distributed to senior supply chain managers, outlining a 5-year inventory restructuring initiative. The title of the initiative is Permanent Inventory Removal. The memo does not use the language of conspiracy. It uses the language of business, margin optimization, category rationalization, SKU consolidation, lifecycle revenue modeling. The language is dry, professional, and precise. And what it describes is the deliberate, planned elimination of product categories that do not generate recurring revenue, that cannot be connected to data-gathering ecosystems, or that enable consumer self-sufficiency to a degree that reduces long-term customer dependency on retail infrastructure. The memo contains a framework. The framework has 3 tiers. Tier 1 is immediate removal, products with near zero margin and no recurring revenue potential. These are the hand tools, the manual kitchen implements, the basic repair parts. Remove them from inventory systems, reallocate shelf space to higher margin alternatives. Do not announce the change. Tier 2 is gradual phase-out, products with moderate margin but high consumer attachment. These are the canned goods, the analog medical supplies, the printed reference materials. Reduce shelf allocation by 20% per year. Consolidate to a single brand or SKU where multiple existed. Allow the products to become harder to find without formally discontinuing them. Tier 3 is regulatory facilitation. Products whose removal can be accelerated through legislative or regulatory action. These are the incandescent bulbs, the mercury thermometers, the legacy seeds that can be restricted through patent enforcement or biosecurity regulation. Work with industry groups to support regulatory frameworks that functionally eliminate these products while maintaining the appearance of consumer choice. The memo is not a plan to starve the population. It is not a plan to control the food supply. It is not a conspiracy to disable civilization. It is something more mundane and more dangerous. It is a rational business strategy that treats consumer self-sufficiency as a market inefficiency to be corrected. Every item that a consumer can use indefinitely, repair independently, or replace without returning to a retailer represents lost revenue. The memo does not say this in those words. But the math is there, and the math is clear. A customer who owns a hand drill that lasts 30 years makes one purchase. A customer who owns a cordless drill with a proprietary battery makes a purchase every 18 months. Multiply that across every product category, every household, every year, and the revenue difference is not incremental, it is structural. The strategy has a name in the memo: dependency consolidation. The memo defines it as the process of transitioning consumer product ecosystems from ownership-based models to access-based or renewal-based models. Translated from corporate language into plain English, that means making sure you cannot own something once. You must keep paying for it, and if the thing you want to own once still exists somewhere in the supply chain, the strategy is to remove it. This is what Gerald Hutchins meant when he said impossible. He was not describing a market downturn. He was describing a supply chain that had been restructured so that the medications his community needed were no longer allocated to independent pharmacies. Not because of demand, because of a business decision about who gets to have access and who does not. This is what Roy Caldwell meant when he said erasure. He was not being dramatic. He was being precise. The tools his customers wanted had been erased from the supply chain. Not outcompeted, erased. The manufacturers were acquired, the production lines were shut down, the molds were destroyed, the designs were shelved. The knowledge of how to make a hand-forged wrench set in the United States is now held by a shrinking number of people who are getting older every year. This is what Patricia Coleman meant when she held up her list of 147 seed varieties that no longer exist in the commercial supply chain. Those seeds represent 10,000 years of agricultural selection. Each variety was adapted to specific conditions through generations of human observation and care. They cannot be recreated. They can only be preserved or lost. And the commercial system that was supposed to distribute them has decided they are not profitable enough to distribute. Here is what Raccoon Survival needs you to understand. This is not a story about 10 items. It is a story about a system. The system is not broken. The system is working exactly as designed. It is designed to maximize recurring revenue by minimizing consumer independence. Every item on this list shares one trait. It works by itself. It does not need a network. It does not need a subscription. It does not need permission. That independence is the problem. Not for you, for the revenue model. And the system is not finished. It is accelerating.